When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. If you've ever been confused about your whole entire existence, then this is the episode for you. Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of Life Vetted. Thank you for being here and thank you for tuning in. On this episode, I wanted to dig a little deeper into something I touched on a little bit in my first episode. I spoke about this kind of spiritual journey that I went on after I had separated from my previous relationship. And I want to dig deep on that and I want to kind of get into it. And that's something that started even before, 4 years ago. However, it takes a while for you to really realize what it is that you're in search of. And so I wanted to get a little bit deeper into that. In my podcast, you guys are going to hear me reference a lot of things that I have done some research on. There's people now on the internet that are like mentors, really, for me anyway. Even though I've never met them, I feel like they are. I've listened to a lot of Abraham Esther Hicks, Dolores Cannon, Joel Dispenza, Bashar, Danny Morell, Bill Donahue, and one of my favorite TikTokers right now, Optimistic Banks. I love Optimistic Banks. If he comes around and sees this video or tag him in the comments, that would be one of my dream collabs. I would love to have him on my podcast or go on his podcast. His name is Optimistic Banks, and I like the way that he explains things and kind of brings it down to earth for people to really understand. And I hope to also do that with my experiences and my stories. Growing up in a Hispanic household, it is very confusing for many different reasons, especially if you're someone that has critical thinking and you grow up and you kind of are the black sheep, if you will, or you question a lot of the things. You just don't take what your family tells you as the truth, and you grow up and you kind of start to question things. Growing up, parents are the Bible, and whatever is they say goes. And so I kind of grew up in that environment. And in my history being Cuban, right? I wasn't born in Cuba, but I spent my whole childhood and adolescence 2-3 months out of the year in Cuba every year. Sometimes we would go on summer break almost every year, and then we would definitely go sometimes on Christmas break. So I spent a lot of time in Cuba, and so growing up in that environment, you don't question things. You kind of just listen to what your parents say, your family says, and that's kind of how I grew up. And so for those who don't know, the history of Cuba and religion is a little confusing in itself, because although Cuba is a country where predominantly everyone is Catholic, during the time of slavery, when there was Africans that came over and were on the island, and indigenous people as well, they had their own practices and their own religious beliefs that they weren't allowed to practice freely. And so the merging of African religion and Catholicism kind of merged into one. So, for example, a lot of people in Cuba are Catholic, but they practice what's called Santeria, which is an African-based religion. They believe in many different gods, as Catholics have many different saints. And so what they would do is they gave names to these Catholic saints with their gods in mind, so that they essentially wouldn't get caught practicing their religion and be, you know, beheaded or whatever. So as the times, you know, as the years rolled by and things progressed, etc., there's kind of been like this merging of these two religions, which is already kind of confusing for, you know, someone young or someone trying to explain it, you know, to someone else, just as I'm trying to explain it to you guys now. I'm sure you guys are like, what, you know, for those who don't know. So growing up, I mean, there's a lot of confusion in regards to what even like my parents believed. You know, my grandmother, who, you know, for all intents and purposes is like the monarch of of our family, essentially. She practiced this African Catholic merged religion while she was still in Cuba and while she was on the island. And then once she came to the United States, after my mom, you know, fled the island, my mom spent 4 years in Venezuela, and then she came to the United States with my brother. Once she got my grandmother over here, my grandmother almost like repented for her whole life, you know, whatever she, you know, had done in Cuba, and became a born again Christian. So I grew up going to Cuba my whole life, seeing the practice of one religion, and then growing up, I'd come home, or I'd be in Miami where I grew up, and I would see my grandmother practicing this whole completely different religion, because, you know, Catholicism and Santeria and, you know, Southern Baptist are like the complete opposite. You know, it's like two different worlds. And so I grew up very confused about, you know, a higher power. You know, I grew up going to the Baptist church with my grandma. You know, she'd make me go, you know, I was young, so, you know, I had to do whatever I was told, essentially. So I grew up going every Wednesday and every Sunday and sometimes on Saturdays, and it kind of all revolved around that. And because my mom really didn't have a sense of faith herself, she kind of just went along with, you know, whatever my grandma, you know, would say. And it became really confusing, because as I grew up and as these kind of bad things were happening to me as a child, I questioned a lot of the whole good versus evil thing and good versus bad. It was very polarizing for me as a kid. You know, I remember, you know, falling in love with music at a young age. My stepdad would have like these Columbia House. Do you guys remember like the mail thing that would come, and you would put like little, like it was stickers of the albums, and you could like rip them. They were kind of like stamps, and some were stickers, I think, and you could put them on these little boxes, and you would order them, and then they would come in a little, you know, in a little package for you. Well, my stepdad used to receive those all the time as a kid when we lived with him. And I remember the first time that I really fell in love with music was he got one of those packages, and there was 3 CDs in it. It was Mariah Carey Fantasy, the Boyz II Men album, and Michael Bolton. Okay, and I remember like even asking for like a CD player that year for Christmas, and I was just like obsessed with Boys to Men. And I remember like my grandma would be so upset when I would like listen to it. And you know, in the CD packets, they would have like the lyrics of the songs and stuff. And like I remember like pleading with my grandma and being like, look, the lyrics say God, this is like good, you know. And like she would be like, no, that's like, you know, music of the world and all. I mean, it was like really confusing to me because like I loved it so much, and like my grandma was telling me it's bad, you know. So, and from that, I mean, as a kid, you know, it's just becomes a very confused world for a child, and it's very black and white. And it's if you grow up like that, you question a lot of things, you know. And as I got older, as a child, when I was, I mean, like 4 or 5, I was molested by a girl cousin of mine. And my cousin was a churchgoer. Like, she would go to church, like, religiously. Her mom was a fanatic. I mean, they would not miss a day. Like, she, you know, it was like every single week, all the time. And I remember as I got older, I just started to question, like, well, if these people are going to church, but this happened to me that I know now was not something good, then how is it that that could happen? I mean, essentially, these people are going to church. They're good people, right? Quote unquote. And they're doing things that weren't good, or things that I know for sure affected me my entire life, you know? And so you just start questioning things, right? And you don't understand it. And when you live in the kind of environment that I lived in, that you don't really talk about stuff, or at least I didn't feel comfortable or safe to talk about certain things, you go on a quest to try to find out the answers yourself. And so I moved out of my house really fast after graduating high school. I was always the oldest in my class because of my birthday. I believe I was 18 when I graduated, if I'm not mistaken. And so I moved out of my house really quick, and I went on this kind of journey to being by myself and working and going to school and paying rent. And I was really young. I was the only person in my group of friends that had their own house, had their own place, you know. And I had to face a lot of things on my own, as I did even when I was a child, right? Because even when I was little, I was still pretty much facing things on my own. You know, my mother worked all the time. I was home alone a lot. My dad was not very present. And so I didn't really have anyone sheltering me or really protecting me from an early age. And so having have had all these things happen to me when I was a kid, like having an abusive brother, you know, my mom also not being emotionally like capable of being a present person. She was always more worried about taking care of her family in Cuba as opposed to protecting me or even protecting my brother. So having all of this going on that, you know, we'll get into in other episodes, you grow up and you're kind of like figuring all these things out by yourself. And I remember that, you know, my grandma and my mom or everyone would be like, well, you pray and, you know, you pray really hard and God will help you. But as I got older and, you know, things were happening, I remember I would pray and I would pray and I would want good things to happen, but good things were not happening. And so I remember one time when I was older, I had gone to my grandmother's church, which was in the same neighborhood where we lived, and it was always very confusing to me because the church was Christian, like Baptist, but like the father of the preacher would always wear like a yarmulke, like one of those Jewish hats. And so it was very confusing. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I'd never understood that, right? And so, I remember in one of his, like, in one of the, I don't know what you call it, sermons, or I don't know. I know how to say it in Spanish. I don't know how to say it in English, but in one of his, like, speeches, he was talking about how, there was this book, the Da Vinci Code, that had come out, and how it was like blasphemy, right? Like how like we shouldn't even read it, and how it was like the devil's work and all this stuff. And that only made me more curious about this book that nobody wanted us to read. And so, as I moved into I was living in an efficiency, but then I moved into like my first little apartment. I remember that one of my friends had the book, The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, and he gave it to me. And I started reading it, and I became obsessed. If you know about this book, obviously, it's fiction, but there's a lot of like things in the book that are true. Like, he talks about like paganism, and he talks about like Egyptians, and like all these historical facts that are very true, and he uses it and merges it into this like fictional story. But I became obsessed with like the facts that were in the book. Like, I remember I would read it and then I would write them down, and then I would go and like search it, on the computer, or I would find a book and then I would look it up, and I just became obsessed with the idea that Jesus was a man, and that he had a family, and that he had offspring, which is essentially what the book is about. If you've read it, you obviously know that. And so I became obsessed with that because my whole life I was taught that Jesus was, the son of God, and like this mythical kind of powerful person. And so I became obsessed with this idea because I was like, wait, this is not what I've been told. I've been lied to. And so I became obsessed with that. I looked up, I started, because I read that book, I started looking up like different religions and Buddhism, and like all these different kinds of religion. I already knew more or less about, Catholicism and like Santeria coming from Africa. So I just became obsessed with religion and all these different religions, and at the same time that I became obsessed with religion, I became very, very angry. I was so upset because I felt like everyone had been lying to me. Okay. And this is before I got into therapy, obviously, and when I got into therapy, I learned more about myself and the way that I grew up and how that affected me. This was before that. And so I was just angry because I felt like everyone had lied to me. Nobody wanted to tell me the truth. And I was like on this mission to prove that, that religion is a hoax, that God is a hoax, that everything was a hoax, right? Essentially I was on the verge of like being an atheist, And I remember that, I was so mad, and I got away from all of these ideas that my life throughout that time was very tumultuous, you know? From the time that I was like 19 all the way to like 27, like 28 when my daughter was born, it was very crazy, up and down, very tumultuous. I had a lot of fun in the same time, I traveled, I hung out with, I was living by myself, so I had a lot of fun. I partied, I did what you're supposed to do in your 20s, but internally, there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of questions, and I mean, it was a time where it was just go, 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 don't think, just do. Everything is a lie. It doesn't matter. That kind of thinking throughout that time. It wasn't until my daughter was born and that I went into therapy that I could say that the noise kind of subsided a little bit, and I was able to really go forward in a way where I was doing the work to finding out what is really going on here in a real way. The mixture of being young, living on my own, having all these responsibilities, paying rent, and the anger of discovering that everything that I was told could possibly be a lie, all that mixture, it wasn't a good mixture. And being young, and it wasn't a good mixture because it just kept me going and going and going and not thinking and just doing. It kept me in that. All the truth that I was seeking really wasn't that important anymore, because I just felt like I was lied to and all of it is bullshit and all these people are bullshit. And so that was enough for me, and I just kind of went off the handle, if you will, throughout that time. When my daughter came, again, I realized that I had to do something so that she wouldn't suffer the same fate that I did as a child. And so when I started doing my therapy and doing it regularly, I began to learn, obviously, all the things that had happened to me as a child and how that affected how I trusted people, how I presented myself to the world. I understood why from the time that I was very little, and then when I moved out, all I did was run and do and work. And that's all I did. I was on survival mode from a very, very young age. From when I was molested to when my brother was holding my mom by the neck, and I was 3 years old, I remember, and all those tumultuous things, my brother pushing my mom or hitting my mom or doing that to me, his drug problems, and then the problems with my family in Cuba and going to Cuba and seeing my cousins live, in poverty, and then all I ever did was try to survive. I was trying to survive and trying to just make it through since I was very young. And so when I moved out, that's kind of exactly what I was doing. When I had this realization that I had been lied to and that, the world doesn't work the way that I thought it did, I just kept going. It was just nonstop. I just kept going to school, kept working. It was survival of the fittest. I never ever was I relaxed, because in your brain is helping you to keep you alive and to keep you safe. And for me, being relaxed was death. So I never stopped. I just kept going. The person who made me stop for the first time was my daughter. Bringing her home, I remember I had a huge, panic attack, because I looked at her and I was like, I can't fucking do this. Who let me do this? Like, what the fuck was I thinking? I realized I was not equipped to be a mom. I realized I was not in the right relationship with the right person. I realized that I had made this life altering decision and I didn't know how I was going to do it. That is why I made the decision to start going to therapy. So when I started going to therapy, I realized that none of the things that had happened to me were really my fault. For a long time, I thought they were my fault. And and we're talking about as a child, right? Like, obviously you go through trauma when you're a child, and for a certain amount of time, the things that happen to you are not your fault, because you as a child don't have control of certain things, right? When you grow up, and as soon as you become aware of the things, and as soon as you become aware of the truth for you, now you have a choice, right? You have a choice to go this way or to go that way. And so up until that point, a lot of the things that I did were just autopilot. They were coming from my subconscious. They were coming from how I grew up and what I knew. And it wasn't until I started going to therapy that then I became aware, right? There was a switch in me that now I knew exactly what was going on. And so I had a choice that I needed to make. And even after I went to therapy and got, somewhat clarity about my personal situation, I still made mistakes. People think that when you go through this spiritual enlightenment or whatever, that it looks a certain way, but it really doesn't. Spirituality and becoming more enlightened is not for everyone. There's a lot of darkness that you have to face that a lot of people don't want to face. They're scared of it. And I was too for a long time, but I had to face a lot of things about myself that weren't very nice. I had to face a lot of things about people that I thought loved me and cared about me, or that they were supposed to, and I had to face a lot of things about them that weren't so great to admit to yourself. And so it's not for the weak. You can live your whole life. They say ignorance is bliss, and it is very true. You can live the rest of your life in ignorance, in thinking that things are a certain way, and you can live like that until the day you die, and you could probably be okay and not have, not think anything else of it. But that was not my path. It wasn't for me. Because I was alone for most of my life, as a child, as an adolescent, as a teenager, I had to learn a lot of things, and things didn't make sense, and I was craving knowledge, and I was craving knowing. And so, unfortunately or fortunately for me, I had to learn the hard way through various ugly experiences and various things in my life. So when I started going to therapy and I started to learn all these things, it gave me a little bit of release, and it gave me clarity to be able to be like, okay, I understand these things about myself, and now I can move forward in a different direction. I remember when I was my first year in college, I remember I had an English professor, and the English professor had all of us write down, this is like the first day in class, had all of us write down our name, our major, and our birthdays. And I remember some stupid guy in the class, he was like, oh, you want us to write down our birthdays so you could tell us what zodiac signs we are? And the professor said, yeah, I do. And him and all his little friends were laughing, and they were like, oh, you're gonna tell me that with my birthday and my zodiac sign, you're gonna be able to define who I am or my personality and all that. And I've always had a kinship for that. I never really got too deep into that. I just enjoyed it. It was more like a fun kind of thing. But I remember that day because it was really impactful for me. The English professor said, so you don't think that the planets and the universe or everything that's out there has no effect on us down here? And the guy was like, no, it can't. It's impossible. It can't have any effect. And the English professor went on to explain, well, if the moon is a gravitational pull for the tides, and the human body is made up of water, certain amount of water, and the moon is the gravitational pull making waves and making tides, and you're made up of this water, you don't think that the moon or the position of the moon might have a little bit of an effect on you? And so he said something to that extent. And it was really impactful to me because ever since I could remember, I've always been obsessed with the stars and the sky and the moon, and like earth science was like my favorite class, and like I was always obsessed with that, but I never really thought of the correlation. And so that English professor, that when he said that, it really impacted me, and I was like, man, that's crazy, like that makes so much sense, right? And I never really thought much of it, but that always stayed in the back of my head. It wasn't until 2020 that I really got really curious about, that astronomy, astrology, and all that stuff. And so I always wondered, right? Because, for example, I am a Libra, a September Libra, and Libras are supposed to be like really lighthearted and kind of flaky, and maybe like they don't like making decisions. They're very indecisive, and I never really I identified with the happy-go-lucky kind of traits, but I never really identified with the indecisive and kind of being like lighthearted. And because I was always told by friends, by boyfriends, like, dude, you're intense. Like, why are you so intense? Or like, why are you so obsessive? Or what? And I never, and it's true. I'm a very kind of intense and deep thinking person, and I never identified with those things. And I always wondered, I was like, man, why am I like that? Why am I not more like chill and free spirited? And like, I never understood that. So it wasn't until like around 2020 that I got a little more curious about that. Partly was because of the situations going on in my life at the time. Like, as humans, we want to try to make sense of things, and we want to try to have an explanation for things. And so I believe that we have created these things in the world to help us understand more about ourselves. And consciousness has created these things, and we are all consciousness. And so we've created certain things to make sense to us in a way where we can understand it. And I believe that of astrology. And I mean, I don't believe that it is concrete and that it needs to like rule your life. However, I do feel that it is a tool in which we can use to better understand ourselves and use that energy to make it into what we want or what we need. And so in 2020, that is something that I was searching for answers because of what was going on in my personal life. And I came around to saying, well, you know what? Maybe I should get like a full birth chart reading. And so I ordered my birth chart reading, and it was the first time that, like I had mentioned to you guys before, like talk therapy can only take you so far. Like you learn certain things about yourself, but then there's something higher, something that doesn't have a logical explanation to some, that doesn't feel logical. It doesn't feel like, oh, that's not real, right? Like 2 + 2 is 4. You know, when you start to talk to someone about a birth chart and constellations in the skies and like how that affects you or whatever, a lot of people will be like, oh, that doesn't make no sense. 2 + 2 is 4. Okay, that is mumbo jumbo, blah, 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 right? So for me, although talk therapy really helped me with understanding like my childhood and all the things that happened to me, I was trying to get to another level. There was something missing. It wasn't until later that I realized that what was missing was my connection and my faith and my soul connection to source and all that is. I didn't understand that until later. I didn't understand that until, just a little while ago. But it started with trying to find something bigger, something on another level. And so I looked for my birth chart. Like I said, I ordered it. I even talked to an astrologer. And when I went through my birth chart and I understood more about the positioning of these constellations and the time that I was born and the houses and all these things, it wasn't until I read all these things and I spoke to an astrologer who doesn't know me, right? He doesn't know me from Adam. Okay, all I did was give this man my name and my time and date of birth, and everything that he told me was exactly what was on this kind of report that I ordered from online. And when I read everything, I understood, like, part of me, why I was intense and why I craved all this knowledge and why I wanted to, and why I was kind of, why I always felt so attached, and why I wasn't the typical kind of description of what, a Libra is or whatever. Okay. When I read my chart, a lot of me made sense even more in a deeper level. And it also became a bit of a release because as I had learned through my therapy, the things that happened to me as a child were not my fault. And that became a weight off my shoulders when I read this birth chart of all these placements and all these different things. Like, that also became a weight off my shoulders. I mean, I recommend everyone to do that. It became almost a realization that these things happened for a reason, were meant to happen almost. It's hard to kind of admit to yourself sometimes that everything that is in our life is due to us, is a reflection of us, is what we've called, is energy we've brought into our life. I mean, it's hard to admit that. A lot of people would much rather point fingers at their parents or life or the world or the government or whatever. It's a lot easier to do that than to really realize that we are all energy. We are all one. We are all part of this one consciousness. And everything is a mirror. The people that we talk to on a daily basis, the experiences that we have, it's all a mirror of the energy that we are vibrating, and it's all reciprocal. You know, I truly feel that if you found me and you're listening to me, it's really you listening to you. If you get it, you get it. And so for me, that was another kind of eye-opening experience that made me hungry to find out more and to learn more. When I spoke to my astrologer that I talk to, pretty regularly, at least once or twice a year, this person doesn't know anything about me. At that time, I was not very active on social media. A lot of people be like, oh, well, he looked up your Facebook page or whatever. I mean, no, it's impossible. All my pages were private at the time. I wasn't very active on social media. I took a break from social media from 2018 to 2021. And so, I mean, people try to make logic of certain things, but in reality, you can't. And in reality, some things are just unexplainable, and that's the explanation to them. And so when I spoke to him, I remember he, had my whole chart, and he told me, he said, your chart tells me that your childhood was very bad, that you had an emotionally abusive parent or guardian, that you had a lot of abuse in your family, that you grew up a certain way. I'm like all these things that, how could you know unless this is true? And so when I spoke to him for the first time and he kind of explained to me everything on there and the degrees and all these things, I became an instant believer, because there's just no possible way that this man could know any of these things. I mean, he specifically told me about my mom. He specifically told me about having an abusive family member, a brother. I mean, he was very specific about certain things that there's just no way that he would know. And so that only made me more hungrier for more knowledge. It made me hungrier to find out more. And very soon after, I had a realization that something else, something bigger, is at play. I did a bit of research on psilocybin, and because I was very depressed after I ended everything. It got very dark because I was just tired. I always felt like I kept failing, and I know that I have done a lot more work on myself than anybody that I've known to better myself. So I couldn't really understand why I kept kind of repeating these mistakes. And so I was very down on myself. And so I am not a believer of medication, or like Western medication, if you will, like antidepressants and things like that. I don't believe in those things. I don't think that they cure you. I think that they just keep you as a patient. And so I did a lot of research on natural medicine, like herbs and like plant medicine and all these things. And I came across psilocybin. Psilocybin, aka mushrooms. I had never done that before, ever. I looked up the benefits of this plant medicine. I had watched a documentary on it on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, it's so freaking good. It's called How to Change Your Mind on Netflix. It's like a 8-episode or 4-episode. I don't remember, but it's a short documentary that goes through the history of psychedelics and how they were used and their intentions of back in like the 70s and the 60s, and how they would use it through therapy for soldiers and like all these different things. And so I went on the hunt for this medicine. I couldn't find it. I don't have friends out here really. And so I tried getting it from someone back home. I could not find this thing for the life of me, okay? And then, as you would have it, the universe, through its divinely perfect way of everything that it does, because the universe is perfect, whether you believe it or not, it sends it to me. Psilocybin. It sends it right to me. I had been searching for this plant medicine like you would not believe, okay? Highs and lows, you would think, me being from Miami, I could just call someone and be like, yo, can you hook it? Like, no, there was no way for me. No one. There was nothing. And then out of the blue, one day, I am talking to this couple and we're talking about spirituality. We're talking about source. We're talking about God. We're talking about all these deep things. I don't even know how we got into that conversation. And they tell me, like, they say, we're on that journey too. We're learning all these things and da 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 da. And then I bring this up about this plant medicine that I've been trying to find because I'm trying to have this unworldly experience so that I can find myself and be deeper and be more connected. And out of the blue, the guy's like, no problem, I got you. Out of nowhere. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I really couldn't believe it. And that's just how the world works, doesn't it? That's just how the universe works. And I came home, I think it was a weekend, obviously did not have my daughter. Okay, chill. And I went on my journey by myself. I had never done it before. And I did it all by myself in the comfort of my own home. And I tell you that I had an awakening that same moment. I spent about, 6 hours just crying and releasing. It felt like a release of everything that I had been holding on to for I don't know how long. I was so tired the next day because it felt like my body had gone through like a marathon. Like I had ran like a 15K or something. And I slept the whole day the next day after I had my experience. And when I woke up the following day, it was as if my house, my home was more colorful. The trees were greener. The flowers were brighter. It was as if I had opened up my eyes and literally stepped through a different dimension. It became so clear, everything. It was like a feeling of connection with everything and everyone, with myself, it was truly, truly, truly transformative. You never stop learning, is what I've learned through all this. You never stop learning and growing and transforming. The purpose of this life is that we are creators, all of us. We came from creation. We are creation. We are the universe itself, playing itself out. And so we have come here to create. And so the creation, it never stops. And after I did that, I honestly, it saved my life. I was in a very dark place, and doing that really saved me. It helped me to understand all these things that I didn't even have to speak it. It was almost as if I woke up that next day and I already knew it, you know? And that's what I mean by, talk therapy only goes so much. I realized in the last 4 years that I was so angry with religion, and I was so angry with this idea of God. It was almost as if I came back like full circle. I understand now more than anyone that although I don't practice organized religion, I know that the human experience has created that and has created the story of God, because humans need something to believe in. We do. Even in AA, like they say, believe in something bigger than yourself. And I truly believe in that. Humans need something bigger than them to believe in. Now, does religion get a little crazy with certain things and taking things a little too literal, like the Bible, for example? Yes, absolutely, it is my belief that they take it a little too literal. However, God, or the belief of something bigger than yourself, is very necessary. It connects us. And if you look at all these religions and everything they talk about, and you do your research, as I have, on all these various different kinds of beliefs, it all comes back to one thing, which is love, essentially. And although I personally do not believe in a man in the sky and Adam and Eve and a rib and all of that, I can now, from my perspective, understand that these stories, these fables, these teachings, if you will, they help to unite us in a way where we all believe in good. I was in search of truth, and so I kept praying or looking to the sky for this man to help me, or this God in the sky. I say God because it's easier for some people to understand. I use the word source more than anything, because that's really what it is. It's the source of all. It's the source of light. In reality, what I came to find is that there is no separate entity up in the sky helping me and working to help me. The energy and the source that creates worlds is not separate from me. I am that energy and that source. I am the creator. There is nothing separating any of us. We are a collective consciousness creating daily everything that we see. And so that makes it easier because I understand that I am in control of what it is that I create, and the way that I present myself in the world is completely up to me. And what I see and what manifests in my reality is completely a reflection of myself and my energy. And knowing that there's a bigger story at play here helps to ease the fight or flight mode. I realized that I don't have to work so hard. I don't have to go out there and hustle and because the universe is in perfect sync with what I need and with what I want. And so if I just live and I am grateful and my energy is one of gratitude, that the universe provides, source provides. I mean, it is literally perfect. I mean, the way the earth spins on its axis, the the separation of each planet in our universe, the way the sun, burns, and the distance of earth from the sun. I mean, if you think about our planet and our solar system and our universe, it is perfect. There is nothing. There is nothing out of balance. And so learning that I am not separate, that everything is connected, that I am God, that was a huge realization to me, because every time I prayed and every time I prayed and every time I prayed, the only thing at the end of the day that I found was myself. The more and more that I got into this kind of spiritual journey, the only thing that did was brought me closer and closer and closer to myself. I thought I was being brought closer and closer to God. I thought that's what it would do for me. But in reality, the only thing it did was bring me closer and closer and closer to me. I mean, it tells you that we aren't separate. God, Source, the Holy Spirit. I mean, there's so many different terms that people want to use but at the end of the day, it's all the same. We are not separate from that energy, that consciousness, that love that creates worlds, that's created everything that we see. We are it, and it is us, and we create everything. And so the more, after I had that experience, I got a lot more into, meditating regularly. And I got a lot more into the works of those people that I mentioned: Abraham Hicks, Dolores Cannon, Joel Dispenza, Bashar. I mean, Joel Dispenza does a really good job of merging science and things that we know about the brain and about ourselves and about our bodies with the spiritual. I mean, it's one and the same. He explains everything, and it's beautiful. Like, it's literally the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, the way that it's all in one, like scientists will call it science and religious people will call it, God, whatever, but it's like all the same. And so I got really into the teachings of all these people. Optimistic Banks on TikTok, oh my God, I love that guy. Like the way that he talks and what he says. Like, I'm going to put a clip up real quick so you guys can take a look at that.
Call it God, call it the universe, call it consciousness, call it the all. We are all one thing pretending to be different things. When you wake up to the fact that there's one consciousness and you are an aperture of that, you're a point at which the entire universe is focused, and you start realizing how powerful you are, the universe starts playing with you like that. It'll reflect it back to you. It'll show you how magical you are. And it becomes, what do you really want to do? You got so much power, you can literally do anything. And for me, and for what most people do, is they come full circle and they say, if I could really do anything, I want to be kind to people. I want to help people.
That clip right there is just insane. I mean, there's another clip that he talks about we are the universe, and it's almost as if like the universe put on like one of those like virtual reality like masks or whatever, and it's zoning into one single perspective, which is your perspective, like my perspective. It's almost as if once I realized that I am source and I have the control to change whatever it is I need to change in order to make my reality look the way I want it to look, that gave me all the freedom and all the faith and all the love that I needed to find. It was never anywhere else. It was never in some religion or in some Bible or in some guy in the sky or in a relationship or in anything. It was all here, in me. Now, did my trauma as a kid affect that? Did it make me make a lot of decisions that I probably shouldn't have? Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say talk therapy only gets you so far. You do have to learn those things about you. You do have to learn the psychology of the human brain and the psychology of the human baby, adolescent. You have to learn those things, I feel like, you know. But then after that, that only goes so far. And if you can't find the bigger work at play, I think that there will always be an emptiness in your heart and in your soul. It's a separation from the truth as us, as humans. Because, like I said, we are all that source, that consciousness, that energy. And when you go around not believing in certain things, it affects you. It affects you in a way where you now become victim of your circumstances and victim of the 3D. And I think that's a big problem with a lot of people, is that they think that this is all that there is. And the truth is that the 3D, what you can touch and feel and see, is only a small little portion of what is really at play. The non-physical world is the reality. And the physical world is just what we've created in order to understand ourselves and to grow and for our souls to become wiser. That is literally the whole point. Another thing that I've learned throughout this whole process is that there's many things that can be true at the same time. The first thing that needs to leave your conscious mind when you realize that everything is one is judgment. You can't judge anybody. You can't really stay stuck in that kind of energy because everyone is contributing to the consciousness and to the creation of the world that we live in. A lot of the times, the things that we see that we don't particularly agree with or that we don't particularly like is simply there just for us to understand what we don't want in our life or what we do want in our life. And that was hard for me to understand as well, because I was very black and white about certain things and like, well, if you are this way, then that means that you're bad, or if you do things this way, that means that you're good. I mean, at the beginning of all of this, in my early 20s and, before I had my daughter, a lot of it was very black and white, very judgmental. And I've come to learn that it's all part of the reality that we are all creating as humans, as a collective consciousness. And like I said, a lot of the times when we see things or we experience things or we see things out on the street, we see people acting a certain way, being a certain way, doing certain things, it is only to clarify to us what we want and what we don't want. Our job is not to sit here and try to change people or tell people what they should or should not be doing. That is part of the reason why I started this podcast, is because I understood that. I understand that I cannot change anyone. I cannot make people live a better life or my idea of what a better life is. I can only hope that through the way that I live and how I carry myself now and how I live my life and the beliefs that I have, I can only hope that through that I can inspire people to do the same. And if you came across this video, there's something that you need to hear. There's something that you need to learn. I put the video out into the world and it finds who it needs to find. Before we finish today's episode, I want to give you guys a little food for thought with this video that I found on TikTok, and I will play it for you guys right here. Let's check it out.
The most important thing in the world is what you believe about yourself. That's the most important thing. Your entire experience is fabricated out of what you believe about yourself. I used to get down on my knees and pray all those nice little Sunday school prayers for years, trying to get a God in the sky to do something for me. And I didn't get very much until I learned that God wasn't working for me from up in the sky, but God is working for me from within my very own mind. The verse of scripture brings this out. Be you transformed how? By the renewing of your mind.
That's pretty deep. I think we went through a lot of my kind of journey to where I am today. We touched on a few topics that I think were pretty deep. I could go on and get into different facets of all of this, like the alcohol part, the smoking weed part, the celibacy part, and we can be here for about another 4 or 5 hours. And I think that the best thing to do is to break it down and hopefully give you guys something to think about. Please go in the comments if you have any questions, or feel free to email me at lifevettedpodcast@gmail.com. I will be reading those emails out loud in my episodes, and hopefully we can get into some really cool discussions about what you guys are thinking. And I really enjoyed today's episode. Stay tuned every Friday. Once you're ready, the lessons will definitely find you. This is Life Vetted. Until next time.